video is going to cover curriculum-based measurement. This video will give you a brief overview of what a CBM is, how to conduct CBMs, and how to develop IEPs based on CBM data. CBMs are really used for progress monitoring. They're a very reliable and valid measurement tool that help to estimate the rate of student improvement, helps to identify student needs. It shows where students are performing based on other student norms, as well as showing their own rate of growth in a certain subject area or content area. They're really used to guide instruction. So using a CBM will help to individualize the instruction and meet students at a place where you're teaching within their zone of proximal development. The differences between using a CBM and a traditional standardized measure are that CBMs are a very quick and brief assessment. Most CBMs take between 1 and 4 minutes to administer. Many can be administered to a whole group of students at the same time. Only 1 or 2 probes actually have to be given individually. They have multiple forms of the test that are at the same difficulty level but have different skills in them so that you can retest a student using a test multiple times throughout the year without it impacting the reliability of the test. You can administer CBMs more regularly and at frequent intervals. That's why it's great for progress monitoring. Most traditional measures take 20 to 30 minutes to administer either the whole test or simply a subtest of it, whereas CBMs can be done much quicker and therefore more frequently. CBM data really is a great way to quantify IEP goals. It gives us very clear rates of growth that we want to see over a year, and we'll talk more about that in this video. More and more, we're seeing IEP goals needing to be quantified rather than just setting mastery goals. The frequent administration also allows us to graph and get a visual analysis of how students are performing. If we see a graph and we see an increasing slope, we know that what we're doing is working. If we visually analyze a graph and we see sort of a flat line, we can determine that the student isn't making progress. Either the intensity or the intervention then needs to change. With any CBM that you purchase or the free CBMs that are available that we'll talk about as well today, there are many different ways in which to administer them, and it's really important that you follow the directions that come with the specific CBM. So the directions and following those is what makes it a reliable and valid measurement tool. CBMs come both paper, pencil, and web-based, and if you look in Module 3 on our website, you'll see a supplemental reading. It is an optional reading, but it's an excellent resource for finding web-based CBMs and how much they cost, how easy they are to use, and what skill areas they cover. There's also apps that have been made by a lot of the bigger CBM companies, such as AimsWeb, where students can take them on an iPad. They can take them through a Chromebook. So there's a lot of different options available for how to administer this CBM. Math, reading comprehension, and writing CBMs can be administered whole group and then graded individually. This saves time across the board if you're administering these measures to your whole class at the same time. Really, the only measure that needs to be administered individually is the reading fluency measure, which only takes 1 minute to 2 minutes to administer. There's been a lot of assessment done on finding a reliable time frame to administer it to get a valid result. And it's been shown that you really only need to measure reading fluency for 1 minute to gauge a valid and reliable score. Again, like I said earlier, each CBM really comes with a set of specific directions that you need to be sure to follow in order for the measure to be valid. Video 2 in this module will provide more detail on the directions and how to administer the CBMs. Typically, in IEP development in the past and still in many places today, we use mastery measurement to set our goals and objectives. And really what this is saying is that students will master a certain concept by the end of the school year. Your goal might read, the student will learn all of their multiplication facts in 30 weeks. It might say, by the end of this year, the student will be reading one grade level above where they're at right now. The problem with this is that it's really hard to quantify progress across multiple objectives. And what this means is when we're measuring growth for, let's say, math, we have many different skills that we're measuring. We're measuring computation skills, we're measuring fluency, and we're measuring problem-solving ability. And when we look across the multiple tests that we could administer to determine whether or not they're making progress, they're not equivalent units. We're not saying one test might have a standard score of 50. Another test might have standard scores in the 500s. And so to be able to compare those across assessments, we can't really see whether or not they're making adequate progress or not. Whereas when we use CBMs, we're talking about digits correct. And so whether or not we're assessing fractions or assessing ability to do subtraction, we're looking across how many digits they're improving. And we can say, well, in February, they were able to do 32 digits correct per minute. And now in May, we're seeing they can do 68 correct digits per minute. So we've been able to monitor that growth in a reliable way. When we use mastery measurement, the IEP really does become unmanageable because we're looking at how to progress a student an entire grade level or through an entire content area without being able to progress monitor along the way to determine whether or not that rate is even appropriate for that student. And under IDEA, it says that we are required to progress monitor towards that long-term goal. And really the only effective way to do that is by using CBM probes. So again, if we were to do our more traditional mastery measurement where we're using our diagnostic and standardized assessments to determine goal areas, this is what it might look like in an IEP. The current performance level, student performs at a grade 3 on math, and the goal is that they'll increase one grade level. And so you can see the different objectives that are listed here are really very different skill areas. And unless we're using a measurement tool such as a CBM where all of those grade level objectives are measured in the same assessment tool, it's very difficult for us to track the rate of growth and improvement over time. Now, this is not to say that we don't use diagnostic measures and more standardized testing scores to help guide our IEP development. But when we're making quantifiable goals, it's really important to base that off of our CBM data. So kind of to sum it up, using a CBM, it helps us to eliminate that need for mastery objectives and helps really direct our attention to the progress monitoring of the rate of growth and areas where we can really individualize instruction along the way, and not just we test them in the beginning of the year, we test them at the end of the year, but we're looking at growth as we go through the IEP. And if appropriate, we need to rewrite our IEP goals to make them more manageable and something that the student is able to achieve. We never want to lower a goal, but we may need to adjust it to meet the student's needs. And this really impacts our accountability as special education teachers, knowing that we're providing the most effective instruction throughout the year. So using a CBM to develop an IEP, we're really looking at how a student is maintaining a skill over time. So if we see that those correct digits, for example, in math are decreasing, or the reading fluency rate is decreasing, we know we need to go back and we need to look at our instruction. So using those equivalent rates helps us to do that. We're able to see whether or not what we're doing is working or not. So this might be how an IEP goal looks using CBM data. In 30 weeks, given 25 problems representing the second grade curriculum, which a CBM is always representative of that grade level curriculum, Jose will write 37 correct digits in 2 minutes. So we're using the parameters of that test, which it takes 2 minutes to administer a writing IEP or a writing CBM, and we're saying that they're going to get 37 correct digits right, whereas perhaps in the beginning of the year they were only writing 28 correct digits in a minute. There are a lot of different ways to determine that growth rate. So how much do I write it for? So if they're at 28, how do I know what to set that goal for? With most CBMs comes a growth rate chart that'll show approximately how much a student should be growing. If you have a large gap in student achievement, you really want to look at writing a goal with an ambitious growth rate. But you need to know the student. If this student is someone who you don't feel like is able to kind of tackle that more ambitious growth rate, and we're not seeing the intensity in the instruction, we might end up writing a realistic growth rate. I always try to find a balance between the two of those. So if a realistic growth rate is 0.3 and an ambitious is 0.5, I might make their growth rate 0.4. So these are just really ideas to give you, to help you develop that goal in the end, just so that you know if they're at 28 now, realistically they can learn 0.3, this chart is for math, 0.3 digits each week they'll improve. Then by the end I could say, okay, well then by the end they should be at 33 digits, correct? We really need to look at normative data as well. So most CBMs also come with normative data. How many digits correct are typical third graders achieving? And to compare it based on that, because we really ultimately are trying to close that gap between student performance. So we want to look at how far away they are from the norm and how much they need to be growing in order to increase or to shorten that gap between their performance and their peers' performance. Knowing that we may not ever close that gap, but that we need to really look at the intensity of our instruction in order to help get closer to where their peers are performing. We really need to look at their current level of performance and know whether or not what they're doing is appropriate at that grade level. So you may see more growth in reading fluency in the younger grades than you do in the older grades, because the focus of instruction in those younger grades is learning to read and reading fluency. Whereas the focus of instruction in the high schooler or middle schooler is not reading fluency, so therefore you may not see that level of growth that you see in younger students. And really looking at that CBM decision rule, so that teachers know when goals should be raised. And the idea behind that is if we see students continually increasing in their scores and they're almost matching where they need to be early in the year, then we need to increase that goal. But we don't ever want to lower a goal. Our students may not achieve their goal, but we don't ever want to lower a goal. I think that sends a precedent that you can't achieve at a certain level. And so even though you may not meet that goal by the IEP year, you still do not want to hold an IEP meeting to lower a goal. That's probably not the most appropriate thing to do. So this would just be what some IEP statements for using CBM data. The present level of performance in IEP is really how are they doing right now. And so using CBM data, we could say given passages representing grade 3 material, Katie currently reads 57 words correct in 1 minute. Her goal then would show where you want her to be. So in 30 weeks, which is typically your school year between IEP time, Katie will read 102 words correctly in 1 minute. So they use that growth calculating scale and determined how much Katie could potentially grow based on the average and the normative data, and determined that she could grow that many words by the end of the school year. And then the objective would be that each week, given the passages representing grade 3 material, Katie will read 1.5 additional words correct in 1 minute. And again, that goes back to that growth rate in that scale we talked about. And it talks about at her grade level, that is an appropriate growth rate. That ends our first video. Be sure to talk and discuss with your peers any of the content that you found difficult to understand, or if you have questions or concerns about the content, or just things maybe that you found interesting or that you didn't know before. Be sure to discuss that in your course blog.